I have presided over cases involving fraud, violence, betrayal, and greed. But the morning Patricia Caldwell walked into my courtroom with that trembling little dog on a leash, I realized something darker was hiding beneath her performance. Before we begin this case, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more highly emotional, shocking, and unforgettable courtroom stories like this one. And comment below where you are watching this video from, because I love seeing viewers from all around the world. Now let's begin. The first thing I noticed was not the woman, it was the dog. A small white Maltese mix stood beside her expensive black heels, wearing a red vest that said "Surface Dog" across the side in large white letters. But the vest did not fit properly. One strap hung loose near the animal's stomach, the other twisted around its shoulder. The dog kept pulling backward as if the courtroom itself frightened it. I have seen real service animals before, many times. They enter a courtroom with calm focus. They sit quietly beside their handler. They do not panic when a door closes. They do not bark when a clerk moves a stack of papers, and they certainly do not hide behind their owner every time a stranger walks past. This dog was shaking, and Patricia Caldwell was not. She stood before me with her chin lifted, one hand wrapped around the leash, the other holding a folder so thick it looked like she had prepared for war. She was 51 years old, sharply dressed, with perfect makeup, neat blonde hair, and a face that carried the kind of confidence I have learned to distrust. Not confidence from truth, confidence from control. There is a difference. Truthful people usually come into court hoping the facts will protect them. Controlling people come in believing their personality will. Patricia Caldwell looked around my courtroom like she had already decided who the villain was, who the victim was, and how everyone was supposed to react. According to her complaint, she was suing a grocery store employee named Emily Dawson and the store manager, Daniel Carter, for $25,000. Her claim was emotional distress, public humiliation, discrimination, and what she called a deliberate attack on her medical condition. The alleged attack, Emily had asked one question inside a grocery store: "Is that a trained service animal?" That was all. One sentence, one question. But Patricia claimed that question had destroyed her dignity in front of an entire store. She said customers stared at her. She said someone laughed. She said her chest tightened, her hands went numb, and she nearly collapsed beside the frozen food aisle. She described it with a kind of dramatic detail people use when they want pain to sound expensive. Across from her stood Emily Dawson. Emily was only 24. She wore a simple blue blouse and had both hands locked together in front of her waist. Her face was pale, her eyes red, and every few seconds she looked toward the floor as if she wished she could disappear into it. Behind Emily sat Daniel Carter, the store manager. He was a quiet man in his early 40s, wearing a navy suit that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a closet for the worst day of his professional life. He did not look angry. He looked exhausted. That mattered to me. Anger can be performed. Exhaustion is harder to fake. When I asked Patricia to explain her side, she took a deep breath and immediately placed one hand on her chest. I have watched that gesture many times. Sometimes it is real. Sometimes people touch their chest because they are trying to hold themselves together. Other times they do it because they want the room to know where the sympathy should go. Patricia wanted the entire room looking at her heart. She told me she had entered the grocery store like any normal customer. She said her service dog, whom she called Bentley, was properly trained and medically necessary. She said Emily Dawson approached her aggressively, embarrassed her in front of strangers, and treated her like a criminal simply because she had a disability. As she spoke, she dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue, but there were no tears. That was the first small crack. In my courtroom, I do not judge grief by how loudly someone cries. Some people in real pain sit completely still. Some cannot speak. Some stare straight ahead because if they move one muscle, they will fall apart. But Patricia's motion had rhythm. It had timing. It had pauses, placed exactly where she wanted the courtroom to feel something. She was not remembering. She was performing. And while she performed, Bentley tugged at the leash, turned in a circle, and barked once toward the audience. Patricia snapped her fingers down at him without looking. That bothered me. A genuine handler usually responds to a service animal with care and quiet correction. Patricia reacted like the dog was ruining her scene. Then I turned to Emily. Her voice was so soft I had to ask her to speak up. She told me Patricia had entered the grocery store with the dog inside a designer handbag, not walking beside her, not alert, not focused, tucked inside a bag like an accessory. Emily said the dog began barking near the bakery section. Then it jumped out of the handbag, ran toward a little boy holding a cookie, and snapped at his sleeve. The child screamed. His mother panicked. Customers moved back. Emily stepped in because store policy required employees to act when any animal became disruptive or dangerous. Then Emily said something very important. Your Honor, I didn't ask what disability she had. I know we're not allowed to ask that. I only asked if the dog was a service animal and what task he was trained to perform. The moment she said that, Patricia's face changed. Only for half a second. Most people in that courtroom probably missed it. But judges are trained by years of watching people try to hide what they feel. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes shifted toward Daniel Carter. Her fingers curled harder around the leash. That was not fear, that was calculation. She had expected Emily to sound unsure. She had expected a young employee who could be intimidated. But Emily had used the correct legal language. She had not asked about Patricia's diagnosis. She had asked the allowed questions, and Patricia did not like that. She interrupted immediately. She targeted me, Patricia said. She humiliated me because she thought I looked weak. Emily flinched. That flinch told me more than Patricia's entire speech. The body often tells the truth before the mouth gets permission. Emily did not flinch like someone hearing a false accusation for the first time. She flinched like someone who had already been shouted at, threatened, and made to feel powerless. I told Patricia to stop interrupting. She looked stunned, not ashamed. Stunned as if she was not used to being stopped. That is when Daniel Carter asked if he could speak. I allowed it. He stood slowly, adjusted his jacket, and looked at me with the careful expression of a man who knew every word could become expensive. Your Honor, he said, this was not the first incident. The courtroom went quiet. Patricia turned her head toward him slowly, and for the first time since she had entered my courtroom, the confidence in her face cracked. Daniel explained that Patricia Caldwell had visited 3 locations of the same grocery chain over the past year. Each time there had been trouble involving the same dog, barking, jumping, snapping. Once, the dog urinated near a bottled water display. Another time, it scratched an elderly man's leg when he reached for a shopping basket. And every time an employee tried to address it, Patricia allegedly threatened a lawsuit, discrimination, ADA violation, emotional trauma, public humiliation. She used those words like weapons. I leaned back and looked at her carefully, because this is where many people misunderstand the law. Protections for disabled Americans exist for a serious reason. They protect dignity. They protect access. They protect people who already face enough obstacles in daily life. But when someone abuses those protections with a fake vest and a frightened animal, they do not just break store policy. They damage the trust real disabled people depend on. Still, suspicion is not proof. And a courtroom cannot run on instinct. So I asked Patricia the simplest question in the case. What task is the dog trained to perform? She blinked, then she looked offended. Your Honors, I should not have to reveal private medical information in front of all these people? It was a clever answer. But it was not an answer. She was trying to make my question sound invasive. But I had not asked for her diagnosis. I had asked what tasks the dog was trained to perform. Those are not the same thing. So I repeated it calmly. What task is the dog trained to perform? The room became still. Emily looked down. Daniel stopped moving. Patricia swallowed. Bentley began chewing on the edge of his red vest. Then Patricia said, "He comforts me." A strange silence spread through the courtroom. Comfort can matter deeply. Emotional support can matter deeply. But comfort alone is not the same as a trained service task under the law. Patricia knew that I could see it immediately. She rushed to add, "He can sense when I'm about to have an episode." I asked, "What does he do when he senses it?" Another pause, longer this time. She looked down at the dog. The dog looked back at the courtroom door. And then from the gallery behind Emily, I heard a woman whisper, "Oh my God." I turned toward the sound. A woman in the second row had both hands over her mouth. Her eyes were locked on the dog, not Patricia the dog. I asked her to stand and identify herself. Her name was Rachel Morgan. Her voice shook as she looked at me and said, "Your Honor, I think that's my dog." The courtroom froze. Patricia's hand tightened around the leash. Emily lifted her head. Daniel Carter went pale, and I remember looking at that little white dog, then back at Patricia Caldwell, and realizing this case was no longer about a grocery store argument. It was about a lie that might have started long before anyone walked into my courtroom. Rachel Morgan's words did not land in my courtroom like an accusation. They landed like a match dropped onto dry paper. For several seconds, no one moved. Even Patricia Caldwell, who had spent the morning acting like she owned the air around her, stood completely still. Her hand remained locked around the leash. The little white dog looked up at Rachel, tilted its head, and gave a soft whine. That sound changed everything. You may not think a dog's reaction can matter in a courtroom, but after years on the bench, I have learned that truth does not always speak in sentences. Sometimes it appears in instinct. Sometimes it shows itself in the one reaction nobody had time to prepare. Rachel Morgan took one step forward before my bailiff gently stopped her. Patricia immediately snapped, "This is ridiculous. I don't know that woman." But she said it too quickly. That is something I always listen for. An innocent person accused of something unexpected usually reacts with confusion first. They say, "What?" or "Who are you?" or "I don't understand." Patricia did not sound confused. She sounded defensive. And defense that arrives before shock often tells you the mind was already prepared for danger. I looked at Rachel and asked her to explain. She was a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a gray cardigan and black slacks. Her hair was tied back loosely, her face pale with disbelief. She was not dressed like someone who had come to court expecting attention. She looked like an ordinary member of the public who had walked into the gallery and suddenly found a piece of her life standing on a stranger's leash. Her voice trembled as she told me her dog had disappeared 7 months earlier. His name was Oliver, a small white Maltese mix, rescued from a shelter, microchipped, afraid of loud voices, and trained, not as a service dog, but as a therapy support companion for her 12-year-old son, Ethan, who had suffered severe anxiety after a car accident. The moment she said her son's name, Patricia rolled her eyes. I saw it. So did Emily Dawson. So did half the courtroom. That eye roll was more revealing than Patricia probably realized. When someone hears that a child may have lost an emotional support animal and their first instinct is contempt, it tells you something about the condition of their character. I asked Rachel if she had documentation. She nodded so quickly she almost dropped her phone. She had photos, adoption papers, a missing pet report, screenshots of neighborhood posts. Even a copy of the microchip registration connected to Oliver's shelter file, Patricia interrupted again. Anyone can fake documents. This time I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Miss Caldwell, you are standing in a courtroom holding a dog you claim is a trained service animal, yet you cannot identify the task he performs. Now another woman is telling me that same dog may belong to her family. I suggest you choose your next words carefully. She closed her mouth, and for the first time I saw fear, not remorse. Fear. There is a difference, and judges learn to separate them. Remorse looks inward. Fear looks for exits. Patricia's eyes moved to the side door near the clerk's desk, then to the bailiff, then back to me. That was when I knew there was more beneath this case than a fake vest. Still, I could not allow the courtroom to become emotional chaos. That is where judges must stay colder than the room wants us to be. If I allowed Rachel's shock or Patricia's arrogance to control the hearing, the truth would become buried under reaction. So I brought the focus back to the original case, Emily Dawson, the young woman Patricia had dragged into court. I asked Emily to describe the grocery store incident from the beginning. Slowly. She took a breath and began again. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The store was busy, but not overcrowded. Families were shopping after school. An elderly man was near the produce section. A mother and her young son were choosing cupcakes at the bakery counter. Emily was restocking paper bags near register 3 when she heard barking. At first she thought it came from outside. Then she heard a child cry. When she turned, she saw Patricia Caldwell standing near the bakery, clutching a designer handbag against her body. The dog had jumped out and was pulling at the sleeve of a little boy who had a cookie in his hand. The boy was not hurt badly, but he was terrified. His mother shouted for help. Emily walked over and asked Patricia to control the animal. Patricia's first response was not concern for the child. It was anger. According to Emily, Patricia said, "He's a service dog. You can't touch him. You can't ask me anything. I know my rights." I have heard that phrase many times in different forms. I know my rights. Sometimes it is said by people who truly do know them. Sometimes it is said by people hoping no one else does. Emily did know the rules. Her manager had trained staff because the store had faced customer complaints before. Employees were not allowed to ask about a person's disability. They were not allowed to demand medical records. But they were allowed to ask whether the animal was required because of a disability and what work or task the animal had been trained to perform. That is exactly what Emily asked. Patricia became loud enough that customers stopped shopping. She accused Emily of discrimination. She said she would have the store shut down. She said she would call 911 and report that she was being attacked. Then she did something that made Emily's voice break, as she told me. She pointed at Emily in front of the child's mother and said, "People like her are why disabled people die." Emily looked down after repeating it. I noticed her hands shaking. That sentence had stayed with her. Words can bruise in ways no photograph can show. In a courtroom, people often underestimate the damage of public humiliation, especially when it is directed at someone young, working a job, trying to follow policy, and suddenly being accused of cruelty in front of strangers. Patricia had not simply disagreed. She had turned the room against Emily, or at least she had tried to. Daniel Carter confirmed that when he arrived from the manager's office, Patricia was already recording with her phone. She had the camera pointed at Emily's face and was narrating like she was making evidence for the internet. "Look at this," Patricia allegedly said. "This employee is harassing a disabled woman with a service dog." That detail mattered because Patricia did not start recording to document danger. She started recording after the confrontation began. People do that when they want to control the version of events that survives. Daniel told me he asked Patricia to calm down. He offered to move the conversation away from other customers. He offered to review the incident privately, but Patricia refused. She demanded the employee be fired immediately. When Daniel said he would not fire Emily without reviewing what happened, Patricia called 911. Now, calling emergency services is not a performance tool. It is not a customer complaint hotline. It is not a way to punish a cashier, a server, or a grocery clerk because you dislike being questioned. But Patricia used it exactly that way. The 911 call became part of the case because Patricia included it in her own evidence packet. I found that interesting. People who manipulate evidence often include the pieces they believe make them look powerful, not realizing those same pieces reveal how they operate. I asked to hear the call. Patricia suddenly looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, I don't think that's necessary. That was the second time she tried to stop me from asking the simplest question. And that told me the call mattered. I instructed the clerk to play it. The courtroom speakers crackled, and then Patricia's voice filled the room. She sounded breathless, but not panicked. There is an employee here threatening me and my service dog, she told the dispatcher. I am disabled, and they are refusing me access. The dispatcher asked, is anyone injured? Patricia paused. Then she said, I could be. I'm having an episode. That phrase caught my attention. Not I am injured, not I need medical help. I could be. The dispatcher asked if she needed an ambulance. Patricia did not answer directly. Instead, she said, I need police here right now. This girl needs to be arrested. Emily closed her eyes as the recording played. I watched Patricia while her own voice echoed around the courtroom. She did not look ashamed. She looked irritated. The dispatcher stayed calm and asked what the employee had done physically. Patricia said, she questioned my dog. That is illegal. It was not, but she said it with such certainty that I could understand how a young employee, surrounded by customers, might begin to doubt herself. That is one of the oldest manipulation tactics in the world. Say something false with enough confidence, and decent people waste precious seconds wondering if they are the ones who misunderstood. Then the dispatcher asked whether the dog had bitten anyone. There was another pause, a very long one. And in the background of the call, faint but clear, a child could be heard crying. Then a woman's voice said, your dog went after my son, Patricia shouted over her. He did not bite anyone, but nobody had said bite. Not yet. That was when the jury box shifted. Even though this was not a jury trial, I had spectators seated where jurors sometimes sit, and I saw them react. A few exchanged glances. One older man leaned forward. A woman in the front row shook her head slowly, because everyone heard it. Patricia had defended against a word nobody had used. That kind of overcorrection is not proof by itself, but it is a fingerprint. I paused the recording. I asked Patricia, why did you say he did not bite anyone before anyone accused him of biting? Her answer came too fast again, because that's what people always claim about service dogs. I looked down at the file, then back at her. People always claim your service dog bites. She froze. It was only 1 second. But in court, 1 second can be enough to expose the entire shape of a lie. She tried to recover. That's not what I meant. But it was too late. The words were already there. The room had heard them. Emily had heard them. Daniel had heard them. Rachel Morgan, still standing near the gallery with tears in her eyes, had heard them. And Oliver, the dog Patricia called Bentley, had heard Rachel's voice, because when Rachel softly whispered, Oliver, the dog pulled toward her. Patricia yanked the leash back hard. A small gasp moved through the courtroom. I felt my jaw tighten. A judge is not supposed to show anger easily. The robe demands control. The bench demands restraint. But there are moments when cruelty announces itself so clearly that even silence feels like participation. I told Patricia not to pull the dog like that again. Her face flushed. He's mine. she said. Rachel shook her head. No, he's not. And then Rachel said something that made Patricia's face go completely still. She said, if he's yours, tell the court why he has a crescent-shaped scar behind his left ear. Patricia looked down at the dog, not behind the ear, at the floor. And in that moment, I knew Rachel Morgan had just opened a door. Patricia had been desperate to keep closed. The crescent-shaped scar changed the entire rhythm of the courtroom. Until that moment, Patricia Caldwell had been loud, polished, and aggressive. She had controlled her voice the way some people control a weapon. She knew when to sound wounded. She knew when to sound outraged. She knew when to make herself appear fragile enough that questioning her felt cruel. But when Rachel Morgan mentioned that scar, Patricia lost her timing. She looked down at the dog, then toward me, then toward the bailiff. And for the first time that morning, she had no immediate sentence prepared. That silence mattered. I have learned over many years that silence has different forms. There is the silence of grief, the silence of fear, the silence of confusion. But Patricia's silence was the silence of a person searching for the safest lie. And while she searched, Rachel Morgan stood trembling near the gallery, fighting not to step forward. Your Honor, Rachel said, Oliver got that scar when he was rescued. The shelter told us another dog had attacked him before they found him. It's behind his left ear, small, curved, like a little moon. The dog whined again, not loudly, just enough for everyone to hear. Patricia tightened her grip on the leash, but this time she did not pull. She had already seen how the courtroom reacted when she yanked him back. Manipulative people are often very quick students when the audience turns against them. I asked Patricia a direct question. Does the dog have that scar? She lifted her chin. I don't inspect every inch of my service dog's body in public. That answer told me more than a yes or no would have. She avoided the fact. She attacked the setting. That is a common strategy when the truth is dangerous. If you cannot deny something safely, you make the question seem inappropriate. So I asked again, Miss Caldwell, does the dog have a crescent-shaped scar behind his left ear? She looked offended. I don't know. The courtroom shifted because everyone understood what that meant. A person who depends on a genuine service animal every day knows that animal. They know its habits, its signals, its fears, its medical needs, the way it reacts when tired or stressed. They know scars. They know injuries. They know details strangers would miss. Patricia claimed this dog was medically necessary for her survival, but she did not know whether he had a visible scar behind his ear. I turned to Rachel. Do you have a photograph showing the scar? Rachel nodded, her hands shaking as she unlocked her phone. My bailiff received it and brought it to the clerk. A few moments later, the image appeared on the courtroom monitor. There he was, Oliver, the same small white dog, sitting in a backyard beside a red rubber ball. His ears were slightly lifted. His head turned just enough to show a curved scar behind the left ear. Then the clerk zoomed in. The scar was clear. The courtroom became so still I could hear the soft hum of the monitor. Patricia's face hardened. That is another thing I have learned about deception. When the lie begins to collapse, some people cry, some confess, some panic, but others become colder. They stop trying to look innocent and start trying to survive. Patricia became cold. She folded her arms and said, that proves nothing. Lots of white dogs look alike. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. That is my son's dog. Patricia snapped back. Your son does not own my medical equipment. That phrase struck the room like a slap. Medical equipment. She did not call him a dog. She did not call him Bentley. She did not even pretend affection. In that moment, the mask slipped again. To Patricia Caldwell, that frightened little animal was not a companion, not a trained helper, not a living creature with a history. He was an object she believed could protect her from consequences. I looked at the dog. He had stopped chewing his vest. His eyes were fixed on Rachel. I have had many strange pieces of evidence appear in court over the years, but I cannot describe how heavy that moment felt. A woman claiming victimhood stood before me holding the leash of an animal that may have belonged to a child who had already suffered enough. A young employee was being sued for doing her job. A store manager was being accused of discrimination for refusing to fire her. And somewhere behind all of it was the possibility that Patricia had weaponized a stolen dog, a fake service vest, and the emergency system to build a case for money. But the law still required order, so I continued. I asked Patricia where she got the dog. She said she purchased him from a breeder. When? 2 years ago. What breeder? She hesitated. Then she named a breeder in Ohio. I asked for paperwork. She said she did not bring it. That was interesting because Patricia had brought almost everything else. Printed emails, medical pamphlets, a copy of her 911 call transcript, photographs of herself looking distressed after the grocery store incident, a written statement describing how humiliated she felt. She had prepared an entire emotional presentation, but for the animal at the center of the case, she had no purchase record, no training certificate, no veterinary file, no microchip documentation, nothing. When people bring mountains of paper but leave out the one document that could settle the central issue, I pay attention. Daniel Carter then presented the store's incident report. This report had been written the same day, not after the lawsuit, not after lawyers became involved, the same day. That mattered because contemporaneous records often carry more weight than memories polished later for court. The report stated that Patricia's dog had lunged toward a minor child, that Emily Dawson asked the 2 permitted service animal questions, and that Patricia refused to answer the task question. It also stated that Patricia threatened to sue the employee personally, have the manager fired, and make the store famous for abusing disabled customers. Patricia objected. This is character assassination. I told her it was evidence. She did not like that. The report also included the name of the child's mother, Laura Bennett. I asked whether Laura Bennett had been contacted. Daniel said she had provided a written statement but could not attend due to work. Patricia immediately smiled, as if absence made the statement meaningless. That smile told me she was still confident she could outlast everyone. Then the clerk read Laura Bennett's statement. She described shopping with her 7-year-old son, Noah. She wrote that the dog ran toward him, snapped near his sleeve, and caused him to drop his cookie. She wrote that Emily Dawson approached calmly and asked Patricia to control the animal. She wrote that Patricia became loud, accused everyone nearby of discrimination, and began filming before anyone touched her or blocked her path. Then came the line that made Emily cover her mouth. Laura wrote, "The employee looked terrified, but she was the only person trying to protect my child." Emily began to cry quietly, not dramatic tears, not the kind Patricia tried to display, real tears. The kind that come when someone finally hears another person confirm that they were not crazy, not cruel, not wrong. That is a powerful moment in court. People think verdicts are the only form of justice. They are not. Sometimes the first form of justice is simply being believed. Patricia noticed Emily crying and rolled her eyes again. This time I addressed it. Ms. Caldwell, you will control your facial expressions in my courtroom. She stared at me. I'm allowed to react, and I am allowed to notice what your reactions reveal. That stopped her. The room went quiet again. Then I asked Daniel if the store had security footage. He nodded. Patricia's head turned so sharply I thought she might speak, but she stopped herself. Daniel explained that the grocery store had multiple cameras. One near the entrance, one near the bakery, one near register 3, one facing the frozen food aisle. The footage had been preserved because Patricia announced she was suing before she even left the store. That detail was important. Most customers who experience genuine distress want help first. They want the situation corrected. They want safety, dignity, perhaps an apology. Patricia had gone straight to legal threats. The clerk prepared the footage, and as the monitor warmed, I watched Patricia carefully. She was no longer looking at Emily. She was no longer looking at Rachel. She was not even looking at the dog. She was looking at the screen. That is the look of someone who knows a silent witness is about to speak. Security cameras are different from people. They do not exaggerate. They do not forget. They do not get nervous under cross-examination. They simply show what happened, frame by frame, without caring who is embarrassed. The first clip showed Patricia entering the store. Just as Emily had said, the dog was inside a handbag, not walking beside her. Not performing a task, inside the bag, head sticking out, barking at the sliding doors as they opened. Patricia did not correct him. She looked annoyed, adjusted the bag on her arm, and kept walking. The second clip showed the bakery section. A child stood beside his mother holding a cookie. Patricia moved past them. The dog suddenly twisted, jumped down from the open handbag, and ran toward the boy. The leash dragged behind him. The boy stepped back. The dog snapped near his sleeve. The courtroom reacted. Patricia raised her voice. "He didn't bite him." I did not look away from the screen. No one said he bit him. We are watching what he did. The clip continued. Emily appeared in frame. She did not rush. She did not point. She did not grab Patricia. She approached with one hand slightly raised. The universal gesture of someone trying to calm a situation. There was no aggression, no attack, no harassment. Then Patricia stepped toward Emily with her phone out. Her mouth moved quickly. Emily stepped back. Patricia stepped forward again. The dog barked between them. That was when Emily looked toward the manager's office. A young woman alone on the floor, surrounded by customers, suddenly facing someone who knew how to turn volume into power. I have seen trained attorneys use less pressure than Patricia used in that bakery aisle. The next clip had no audio, but body language does not always need sound. Patricia pointed at Emily's face. Emily's shoulders dropped. Patricia moved closer. Emily stepped backward again. Daniel Carter entered from the side of the frame and positioned himself between them. Then Patricia lifted her phone higher, recording, performing, creating her version. But the camera above her was creating another one, a truer one. When the footage ended, I asked Patricia if she still claimed Emily had approached her aggressively. Patricia did not answer. I asked again. She said, "The video doesn't show what I felt." That was a fascinating sentence, not what happened. What I felt. There is a legal and moral distance between those two things. Feelings are real to the person experiencing them, but feelings do not give someone the right to destroy another person with false accusations. Then Rachel Morgan spoke again, softly. "Your Honor, may I say something about the dog?" I allowed it. She explained that Oliver had always been frightened of raised voices. After the accident involving her son, the dog became a steady presence in their home. Not formally trained as a service animal, but deeply bonded to Ethan. He slept outside Ethan's bedroom door. He followed him during panic attacks. He helped him feel safe after months of nightmares. Then one afternoon, Oliver disappeared from their fenced backyard. Rachel had searched shelters, posted flyers, called animal clinics, filed a missing report. Her son had blamed himself for leaving the back gate open, even though Rachel later suspected the latch had been tampered with. At that sentence, Patricia looked down just once, but I saw it. I asked Rachel, "Why do you suspect tampering?" She said the latch was normally stiff and high enough that a child would struggle to open it. That day, it was hanging loose. A neighbor later mentions seeing a silver SUV parked near the alley behind their home. I turned to Patricia. "What vehicle do you drive?" She stiffened. "That has nothing to do with this case." I repeated the question. "A silver SUV," she said. The courtroom went silent. Now, a silver SUV alone did not prove theft. Many people drive silver SUVs. I knew that. Everyone in that room knew that. But combined with the dog, the scar, the missing report, the behavior, the fake vest, and Patricia's refusal to provide records, the shape of the case was becoming impossible to ignore. Still, there was one more piece needed. The one thing that would cut through every denial, the microchip. Rachel had already mentioned it. Patricia had avoided it. And if the dog was truly Oliver, that microchip would not care about Patricia's performance. It would not respond to legal threats. It would not be intimidated by volume. It would simply identify the owner. So I ordered a brief recess and instructed the court officer to contact animal control for an immediate scan. Patricia's face went pale, not slightly pale. And as the bailiff moved toward the side door with the dog, Patricia suddenly stepped forward and said, "No." One word, sharp, desperate. The courtroom turned toward her. I looked down from the bench and asked, "No?" Her lips parted, but no explanation came out. And that was when I realized Patricia Caldwell was not afraid of losing a lawsuit. She was afraid of what the scanner was about to prove. When Patricia Caldwell said no, the courtroom did not erupt. It froze. There are moments on the bench when one word can carry more weight than an entire testimony. That single word came out of her mouth too quickly, too sharply, with too much fear behind it. She had argued, interrupted, accused, performed, and threatened from the moment she entered my courtroom. But this was different. This was not outrage. This was panic. I looked at her from the bench and asked, "Why not?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hand hovered near the leash, as if she wanted to grab the dog back, but the bailiff had already stepped close enough that she knew any sudden movement would only make things worse. Rachel Morgan stood near the gallery, one hand pressed against her chest. Emily Dawson sat motionless. Daniel Carter leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on Patricia. Everyone was waiting. Patricia finally said, because he gets anxious around strangers. I looked at the little white dog. He was standing beside the bailiff, nervous but not aggressive. His eyes kept moving toward Rachel. His tail gave one small, uncertain wag every time she whispered his name under her breath. I have seen fear in animals before. This dog was not afraid of the bailiff. He was afraid of Patricia. That was not evidence by itself. I understood that. A judge cannot rule because a dog seems frightened. But I could observe it, and what I observed kept pointing in the same direction. Patricia did not want the scan, not because it would upset the dog, because it would expose her. I ordered the recess anyway. As the bailiff carefully led the dog out with an animal control officer who had arrived at the courthouse, Patricia sat down hard in her chair. For the first time all morning, she stopped performing for the room. Her shoulders lowered, her jaw tightened. Her eyes no longer scanned the gallery for sympathy. They stayed fixed on the side door. That is something many people misunderstand about deception. A liar is not always afraid while speaking. Some liars enjoy speaking. They enjoy the spotlight, the pressure, the control. The fear comes when the room stops listening to the story and starts checking the facts. Facts are merciless. They do not care how wounded you sound. They do not care how expensive your folder looks. They do not care how many times you say discrimination if the evidence says something else. During that recess, the courtroom murmured quietly, but I kept my eyes on Patricia. I wanted to see what she did when she thought the main attention had moved away from her. She pulled her phone from her purse. The bailiff noticed it at the same time I did. I told her to put it away. She said, "I need to call my attorney." I said, "You may request time to contact counsel properly, but you will not use your phone in my courtroom while evidence is being verified." Her fingers tightened around the phone. Then, before lowering it, she glanced at the screen. It was quick. But the clerk saw enough to tell me later that Patricia had opened a message thread. That detail would matter more than I expected. When court resumed, the animal control officer returned with the bailiff. The dog walked between them, calmer now, and the moment he entered, Rachel whispered, "Oliver." This time, he pulled toward her with unmistakable force, not wild, not confused, recognizing. Patricia stood immediately. "Do not let her touch my dog." Her voice cracked on the word "my." I asked the animal control officer for the result. The officer held a printed report and said the microchip number matched a dog registered under the name Oliver Morgan Honor, Rachel Morgan Honor, a residential home 12 miles from Patricia Caldwell's apartment. Date, meet, registered 4 years earlier. Shelter adoption record attached. The courtroom went silent in a way I have only heard a handful of times. It was not simply surprise. It was moral recognition. Everyone understood what had just happened. A woman had entered court claiming to be a victim of discrimination while holding a dog that official records identified as someone else's missing animal. Rachel Morgan broke down first. She covered her face with both hands and bent forward as if her knees were about to give out. Emily Dawson turned away, wiping her eyes. Daniel Carter exhaled so deeply it seemed like he had been holding his breath for months. Patricia did not cry. She did not apologize. She did not look at Rachel. She looked at me and said, "There must be a mistake." I leaned forward. Miss Caldwell, the microchip is registered to Miss Morgan. Microchips can be wrong. Are you claiming the microchip was falsified? I'm saying I don't know what that woman did. There it was, the pivot. When Patricia could no longer deny the dog's identity, she moved to attacking Rachel. That is another pattern I have watched for years. Manipulators rarely surrender when proof appears. They simply look for a new target to contaminate. Rachel lifted her head. "What I did? You have my son's dog." Patricia snapped, "You abandoned him." A sound moved through the room, not a gasp exactly, something heavier. Rachel stared at her. "What?" Patricia straightened as if she had found a new path. "You abandoned him. I found him wandering. He was neglected. I saved him." That was the first time Patricia offered an origin story that did not involve a breeder in Ohio. I reminded her of that. "Earlier, you testified that you purchased this dog from a breeder 2 years ago." Her face tightened. I misspoke. "No," I said. "You gave a detailed answer. You said you bought him from a breeder in Ohio." I was confused. "Were you confused when you called him a trained service animal?" She said nothing. "Were you confused when you sued a young employee for asking a lawful question?" Still nothing. "Were you confused when you called 911 and demanded that employee be arrested?" Her eyes hardened again. "Your Honor, I was under emotional distress." That phrase had become her hiding place. Emotional distress. But there is a difference between distress and strategy. Distress explains pain. It does not excuse theft. It does not excuse false claims. It does not excuse dragging an innocent employee into court and trying to ruin her life. The investigation could have ended there for the civil dispute, but one thing still bothered me. How did Patricia get the dog, the missing report, the backyard gate, the silver SUV, the sudden appearance of a fake service vest, the repeated store incidents, the threats, the 911 call, the lawsuit? They were all connected, but the center was still hidden. Then Daniel Carter raised his hand. He said, "Your Honor, there is something else." Patricia closed her eyes briefly. I saw it. Daniel explained that after Patricia filed her lawsuit, the store's legal department reviewed not only the incident footage, but footage from previous visits. They found something unusual from 6 months earlier. Patricia had come into the store without a dog. She had argued with a cashier over expired coupons. She had threatened to call corporate. Nothing unusual for retail conflict, unfortunately. But while reviewing that footage, Daniel noticed something on Patricia's phone. The store camera had captured her standing near customer service, scrolling through a neighborhood social media page. The video quality was not perfect, but when zoomed, the screen showed a missing dog post, Rachel Morgan's missing dog post. The date on the footage was 3 days after Oliver disappeared. I asked Daniel why this mattered. He said because the store is located 5 miles from Ms. Morgan's neighborhood. Patricia had no dog with her then, but 2 weeks later, she came back with the dog in the service vest. The room turned colder. Patricia shook her head. That's insane. But her voice had lost power. I asked to see the footage. The clerk played it. There was Patricia standing near customer service, phone in hand. The overhead camera captured the screen at an angle, but Daniel was right. The image was grainy, yet visible enough to show a small white dog and the words "missing." "Please help" near the top of the post. Rachel covered her mouth. The clerk paused the footage and enlarged the frame. Below the dog's photo, part of the description could be read: small white Maltese mix, answers to Oliver, crescent scar behind left ear, family dog, son devastated. That last word sat on the screen like an accusation, devastated. Patricia stared at the monitor as if hatred alone could make it disappear. Now, again, I had to be careful. Looking at a missing dog post did not prove she stole the dog, but it destroyed her claim that she had no knowledge of Rachel. It destroyed her claim that she had purchased the dog years earlier without connection to the Morgan family. And it suggested that she knew exactly what she had: a missing animal, a grieving child, a family searching, and she still put a red vest on him and dragged him into public places as a legal shield. Then Rachel said something quietly that redirected the entire courtroom. My son saw her SUV. I turned to her. Rachel explained that the day Oliver disappeared, Ethan had been upstairs by his bedroom window. He had been struggling that week, barely leaving the house. He remembered seeing a silver SUV slow down behind their back fence near the alley. At the time, nobody thought much of it. He later told Rachel, but she dismissed it as another neighbor or delivery driver. Patricia said, "Children imagine things." That sentence revealed more cruelty than she intended. Rachel's face hardened for the first time. "My son blamed himself for 7 months. Patricia looked away. Rachel continued, her voice shaking but stronger now. "He stopped sleeping. He stopped going to therapy for a while. He thought Oliver ran away because he forgot to close the gate. Do you understand what that did to him?" Patricia said nothing. Not because she was moved, because there was no useful answer. Then the clerk informed me that the court had received another document from Animal Control, the shelter record Rachel had mentioned. It included Oliver's original microchip number, adoption date, vaccination record, and identifying marks behind left ear, curved scar. That settled ownership in the civil context before me, but I still had to address the lawsuit Patricia brought. I turned back to her complaint: $25,000, emotional distress, discrimination, public humiliation, life-threatening trauma, all built on the claim that Emily Dawson had illegally questioned a legitimate service dog. But the dog was not hers. The task was not established. The behavior was disruptive. The employee's questions were lawful. The 911 call was misleading. The lawsuit was collapsing. And when a lawsuit collapses, the person who filed it often reveals who they really are. Patricia did not disappoint. She stood and said, "Even if there was some confusion about the dog, that employee still humiliated me." Some confusion. That is how she described holding another family's missing dog. Some confusion. I felt the courtroom react before anyone moved. People leaned back. Emily stared at her in disbelief. Rachel closed her eyes as if the words physically hurt. I asked Patricia, "Do you understand what has been established here?" She said, "I understand everyone is against me." That line is common among people who confuse accountability with persecution. To them, every fact is an attack. Every witness is an enemy. Every consequence is proof that they are being targeted. I told her, "No, Miss Caldwell, the evidence is against you." That quieted the room, but then Patricia reached for her purse. The bailiff stepped forward. She pulled out a folded document and said, "I have proof he belongs to me." Finally, after hours of testimony, after denying, deflecting, attacking, and changing stories, she claimed to have proof. I asked her to hand it to the bailiff. The document was brought to the clerk, then to me. It was a printed certificate. At first glance, it looked official. Gold border, paw print seal, bold lettering, service animal registration certificate, name. Bentley Caldwell Handwar, Patricia Caldwell. Status, certified service dog. Patricia lifted her chin again, some of her old confidence returning. "There," she said, "that proves it." I looked at the certificate for a long moment, then I looked back at her, because I had seen documents like this before, and I knew exactly what it was: a purchased online certificate, not proof of training, not proof of ownership, not proof of legal service animal status. A piece of paper designed to fool landlords, store clerks, restaurant hosts, and frightened employees who do not want to be sued. I asked Patricia where she got it. She hesitated. "From a service animal registry." "What registry?" She gave me the name. The clerk searched it. The website sold certificates, ID cards, vests, and emotional support animal packages for a fee. No in-person training. No verified task evaluation, no ownership verification, no legal authority. The courtroom absorbed that slowly. Patricia had brought a fake shield and expected it to frighten everyone. But the investigation was not finished, because while the clerk reviewed the website, Daniel Carter leaned toward his legal representative and whispered something. A moment later, he asked permission to submit one final piece of evidence. He said it came from Patricia herself, her own phone recording from the grocery store, the one she had included to prove Emily humiliated her. Patricia objected immediately. "I withdraw that evidence." I looked at her. "You submitted it to the court." "I changed my mind." "That is not how this works." Her face went pale again. Daniel explained that the video file Patricia submitted was longer than the clip she referenced in her written complaint. She had quoted only the portion where Emily asked about the service dog, but the full file continued recording after Patricia turned away. The clerk prepared the video. Patricia whispered, "No," again, that same word, but this time it was weaker. The video began with shaky footage of Emily standing near the bakery. Patricia's voice was loud, accusing, confident. Then the camera angle dipped as Patricia turned toward Daniel. For a few seconds, the phone captured the floor, the dog, the wheels of a shopping cart. Then Patricia's voice, lower now but still clear, said something to Daniel Carter that she clearly never expected a courtroom to hear. And when those words came through the speakers, Emily Dawson covered her mouth. Rachel Morgan burst into tears, and even I had to grip the edge of my bench to keep my expression steady. The video did not begin like a confession. That is what made it so disturbing. It began the way most manipulative evidence begins, with the person holding the camera believing they were in control of the story. But Patricia Caldwell's phone had captured Emily Dawson near the bakery aisle, pale and frightened, trying to keep her voice calm while a dog barked at her feet and customers whispered in the background. Patricia's voice filled my courtroom speakers again. "This employee is harassing me because I have a service dog." Emily's face appeared on the screen for a moment. She looked overwhelmed, not cruel. Her hands were raised slightly, palms open, the way people stand when they are trying to show they are not a threat. "Mom," Emily said quietly. I'm only asking what task the animal is trained to perform because he ran toward a child. Patricia cut her off. "You are violating federal law." Emily took a half step back. That movement hurt to watch. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was familiar. I have seen that same movement from employees, nurses, teachers, receptionists, and clerks who are trying to do their jobs while someone louder tries to turn their caution into misconduct. Then the camera shook. Patricia turned toward Daniel Carter, who had just arrived from the manager's office. For a few seconds, the phone captured nothing but the floor tiles, the bottom of a shopping cart, and the little white dog's paws moving anxiously near Patricia's shoes. Then Patricia's voice lowered, not enough. The microphone still caught it. She said, "Fire her now, or I'll make this store pay." Daniel's voice was calm. "Mrs. Caldwell, we need to review what happened." Patricia laughed, not loudly, just a small, sharp laugh, and then she said the words that changed the entire case. "I know how this works. I say service dog, you people panic. I say discrimination. Corporate writes a check. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The courtroom went dead silent. I have heard silence in court before, but this was different. This was the kind of silence that arrives when everyone in the room realizes they are no longer listening to allegations. They are listening to intent. Emily Dawson covered her mouth with both hands. Daniel Carter closed his eyes. Rachel Morgan bent forward as if the sound had been knocked out of her chest. And Patricia Caldwell stood completely still, her face drained of color, watching her own voice destroy the version of herself she had spent all morning building. I paused the video, not because I needed time to understand it, because the courtroom did. That statement was not anger in the heat of the moment. It was not confusion. It was not trauma. It was strategy spoken out loud. Patricia had just explained her method in her own words. I say service dog. I say discrimination. Corporate writes a check. That is not a victim seeking justice. That is a person describing a formula. And I want you to understand why that moment struck me so deeply. In my years on the bench, I have watched real disabled people fight to be respected. I have seen veterans with service animals sit quietly through hearings while strangers stared. I have seen people with medical conditions explain only what they legally had to explain, humiliated by the suspicion created by people like Patricia. Every fake claim makes life harder for someone real. Every dishonest performance steals trust from someone who actually needs protection. Patricia Caldwell had not just tried to win money. She had tried to weaponize a law built to protect vulnerable people. And she had aimed it at a young employee who did exactly what she was supposed to do. I looked at Patricia and asked, "Is that your voice?" She stared at the floor. I asked again, "Ms. Caldwell, is that your voice?" Her lips moved, but no sound came out. For the first time all day, she had no performance ready. Finally, she whispered, "I was upset. That was all." I have noticed that when people are caught, they often try to shrink the size of the moment. A threat becomes a misunderstanding, a lie becomes confusion, a confession becomes stress. But the law does not become blind simply because the truth is inconvenient. I resumed the video. The courtroom listened as Patricia continued speaking to Daniel Carter in the grocery store. "You think I haven't done this before," she said. "Your company has insurance. She has a job. I have a disability. Who do you think they're going to believe?" Emily's shoulders visibly dropped on the screen. That was the moment she realized Patricia was not simply angry, she was hunting. Then came something even worse. The phone camera tilted slightly upward, catching Patricia's face from below. She was no longer crying. She was no longer breathless. She looked annoyed, almost bored, as if the entire confrontation were just a negotiation. Daniel said, "No one is denying access." "We're asking you to control the dog because a child was frightened," Patricia replied. "Then tell the child's mother to shut up before I include her too." A murmur moved through the courtroom. Patricia flinched at the sound, but she did not look sorry. Rachel Morgan was crying now, quietly, with one hand pressed against her mouth. Oliver, the dog still under the bailiff's careful control, had lowered himself to the floor, his body angled toward her. The video continued. Then Daniel asked a question that turned out to be more important than he knew. "Where did you get the dog's service training done?" Patricia laughed again. "Training? Please. I bought the vest online. Nobody checks if you scare them enough." The courtroom reacted instantly. A gasp. A whispered curse from the back row. Emily began shaking. I stopped the video again. There are moments when even a judge must take care not to let the room run ahead of the evidence. People were angry now, not suspicious. Angry. And anger, while understandable, can make a courtroom dangerous if it is not controlled. I told everyone to remain quiet. Then I turned back to Patricia. Her face had gone stiff. She was trying to look offended again, but the performance had no strength left in it. The mask had cracked too many times. Everyone had seen what was underneath. "Mims Caldwell," I said, "you told this court the dog was professionally trained." She did not answer. "You told this court he was medically necessary." Still nothing. "You told this court Emily Dawson violated your rights by asking a lawful question." Her eyes lifted just slightly. Then she said, she embarrassed me." That was the only truth she seemed willing to admit. But even that truth was twisted. Emily did not embarrass Patricia. The facts did, the video did, the microchip did, the missing dog report did, her own words did. Then Daniel Carter said there was still more at the end of the recording. I looked at Patricia. She shook her head faintly, not at me, at herself. The clerk resumed the video. The phone camera was pointed downward again. Patricia had apparently forgotten it was still recording. Customers were talking in the background. The dog barked once. Emily's voice sounded distant, asking someone if the child was okay. Then Patricia's voice came through again, lower than before. This little mutt already paid for himself twice. Rachel's body went rigid. I felt the room turn cold. Daniel asked, "What does that mean?" Patricia said, "It means people are stupid. I bring him into stores, restaurants, hotels. They question me, I threaten ADA, and they comp me. Free meals, free rooms, gift cards. Apologies. Everyone is terrified of bad publicity." She paused. Then she added, almost casually, "And now this girl just bought me a settlement." Emily broke. She put both hands over her face and began crying in a way she had clearly been holding back for months. Daniel reached toward her, but stopped himself, unsure if comforting her would look unprofessional in court. Rachel turned away from the screen, unable to look at Patricia any longer, and I sat there behind the bench, feeling something I do not often allow myself to feel during proceedings: disgust, not rage. Rage is too hot. Disgust is colder. It arrives when you see exactly how little regard someone has for the people they damage. Patricia had treated Emily as a target. She had treated Daniel as leverage. She had treated disability law as a weapon. She had treated a missing dog as equipment. And she had treated a grieving child's pain as irrelevant. The clerk stopped the video at the end. No one spoke. For several seconds, the only sound was Emily crying softly and Oliver's collar tag moving faintly as he shifted on the floor. Then Rachel Morgan stood. Her voice was small at first, but it grew stronger with every sentence. "My son thought Oliver ran away because of him. He has cried himself to sleep for months. He stopped going outside. He asked me if Oliver left because he was too much work. Do you understand that? A child thought the one thing that helped him feel safe abandoned him." Patricia looked straight ahead. Rachel continued, "And you had him. You knew people were looking for him. You saw the missing post. You saw the scar. You changed his name. You put a fake vest on him. You dragged him into stores to threaten people. Patricia finally spoke. I took care of him. Rachel's face changed. Pain became fury. You stole him. The bailiff stepped slightly closer, not because Rachel moved toward Patricia, but because the emotional pressure in the courtroom had become enormous. I understood it. Everyone did. But the courtroom had to remain a place of law, not revenge. I asked Rachel to sit. She did, but her hands were shaking. Then I addressed Patricia. Do you still wish to proceed with your claim for $25,000? That question may sound strange, but it mattered. Courts require clarity. A plaintiff who brings a claim must either support it or withdraw it. And I wanted Patricia to say, in front of everyone, what she intended to do now that her story had collapsed. She lifted her chin. And unbelievably, she said yes. A sound moved through the courtroom. Even I paused, not because I was shocked that arrogance exists. I have seen plenty of it. But there is a special kind of arrogance that survives exposure, a kind that believes consequences are for other people even after the truth is standing in the center of the room. I asked, on what basis? She said, Emily had no right to question me in public. I leaned forward. She had every right to ask the permitted questions after the animal behaved disruptively. Patricia's mouth tightened. She made me feel unsafe. I said, Miss Caldwell, the evidence shows you made everyone else unsafe. That was when Emily looked up. For the first time since the hearing began, she's looked directly at Patricia. Not with fear, with disbelief, and maybe with the first small trace of strength returning. Daniel Carter asked permission to speak. I allowed it. He said that after the incident, Emily had been placed on temporary leave pending investigation because Patricia's accusations were so serious. Emily lost shifts. She received hateful messages after Patricia posted a shortened version of the confrontation online. Strangers called the store demanding she be fired. Someone found Emily's social media profile and sent her messages calling her ableist, cruel, and disgusting. Emily had not told me that she had stood there quietly while Patricia demanded money from her. That is another thing I have learned about decent people. They often minimize their own suffering because they do not want to seem dramatic. Manipulators exaggerate every scratch. Good people hide wounds that should have been seen sooner. I asked Emily if this was true. She nodded. Her voice cracked as she said, I was scared to go back to work. I thought I ruined everything. Patricia muttered, consequences. I heard it. So did the bailiff. So did Emily. The room changed again. I looked at Patricia and said, what did you say? She shook her head. Nothing. The court reporter read it back. Consequences. That word sat in the air. Patricia had no idea how right she was. Consequences were exactly what the courtroom had arrived at. But before I could move toward judgment, Rachel Morgan's phone rang. She quickly silenced it, embarrassed, but then stared at the screen. Her face crumpled. I asked if everything was all right. She looked at me with tears spilling over and said, Your Honor, it's my son. He's outside with my sister. He heard Oliver barking from the hallway. The courtroom became still again. Rachel's voice broke. He knows it's him. Now I have rules in my courtroom. Children are not brought into emotional proceedings casually. A courtroom is not theater. It is not a place to stage pain for effect. But this was different. The dog had been identified. The ownership records were clear. The animal had been missing for 7 months. A child had been living under false guilt. And just outside those doors was the person who had lost the most without ever filing a complaint, without ever asking for money, without ever performing for sympathy. I looked at the bailiff. Then I looked at Patricia. For the first time, her expression showed something close to fear, not legal fear, not financial fear, but the fear of being forced to watch the harm she caused become human. I allowed Ethan Morgan to enter. The doors opened slowly. A 12-year-old boy stepped into my courtroom, thin, nervous, clutching his aunt's hand. His eyes were already searching the room before anyone spoke. Oliver lifted his head. The boy froze. Then he whispered one word. "Oliver? Oliver?" The dog pulled forward so hard the bailiff released just enough slack to keep him safe. Oliver ran across the open space and straight into Ethan's arms. The boy dropped to his knees. The dog climbed against his chest, whining, licking his face, tail moving so fast it blurred. Ethan wrapped both arms around him and began sobbing into his fur. No one in that courtroom said a word. Not Emily, not Daniel, not Rachel, not even Patricia. I have seen verdicts announced that made grown men cry. I have seen families reunited after years of legal fighting. But that moment was different. It was not dramatic because someone planned it. It was powerful because it was real. A child who had blamed himself for 7 months was holding proof that he had not been abandoned. And Patricia Caldwell had to watch it happen. I looked at her. Her eyes were not on the child. They were on me, still calculating, still wondering what this meant for her. And that, more than anything else, told me exactly what kind of judgment this case required. The moment Oliver ran into Ethan Morgan's arms, my courtroom stopped feeling like a legal setting. It became something far more human. There was no argument in that moment, no objection, no legal trick, no rehearsed sentence. Just a 12-year-old boy on his knees, holding the dog he thought he had lost forever, sobbing into white fur while Oliver pressed against him like he had been waiting 7 months to come home. I watched Rachel Morgan cover her mouth with both hands, tears running down her face. She did not move toward them at first. I think she was afraid that if she stepped too quickly, the moment might disappear. Her sister stood by the door, crying silently. Emily Dawson had one hand over her heart. Daniel Carter looked down, blinking hard, trying to keep his composure, and Patricia Caldwell sat at the plaintiff's table with her face locked in a strange, empty expression. Not guilt, not sorrow, calculation. Even then, even while a child cried in front of her because the dog she had renamed, dressed in a fake service vest and used as a legal weapon, had finally recognized his real family. Patricia was not watching the boy. She was watching me. That told me everything. There are people who do wrong and feel the weight of it the moment they are exposed. You see their shoulders break. You see shame enter their eyes. You see the human part of them wake up too late, but still wake up. Patricia Caldwell did not wake up. She adjusted. She was trying to determine the next argument. That is when I understood that this case needed more than dismissal. It needed clarity. It needed justice spoken in a way that Emily Dawson could carry home, that Rachel Morgan could tell her son later, that Daniel Carter could take back to his employees, and that Patricia Caldwell could not twist into another story online. I allowed Ethan a few moments with Oliver. The courtroom needed it. Frankly, I needed it too. A judge is supposed to be steady. We are trained to separate emotion from ruling, sympathy from law, outrage from judgment. But we are not stone. We are not machines behind wooden robes. When you sit high on that bench long enough, you learn that the law is strongest when it protects ordinary people from those who think volume, money, and manipulation can replace truth. After a few minutes, I asked Rachel's sister to take Ethan and Oliver just outside the courtroom with the bailiff, not because I wanted to separate them again, but because a child did not need to hear every legal consequence that was about to follow. Ethan stood slowly, still holding Oliver so tightly I thought he might never let go. Oliver's fake service vest had twisted sideways during the reunion. The red fabric looked absurd now, cheap, cruel, like a costume left behind after the performance failed. Before Ethan left, he turned toward me. His face was wet with tears. He whispered, "Thank you. I did not answer immediately. Sometimes the smallest words are the hardest to receive from the bench. I nodded once and said, "Take him home." And when the doors closed behind them, the silence that remained was different. It was no longer suspense. It was judgment. I turned back to Patricia Caldwell. She sat straighter, as if posture could repair evidence. Her folder was still on the table, but it no longer looked powerful. It looked ridiculous. Papers, claims, printed screenshots, emotional language, all stacked neatly around a lie that had collapsed under its own weight. I asked her one final time, Miss Caldwell, do you have any truthful explanation for why Rachel Morgan's missing dog was in your possession? She looked at me, then at Rachel, then at Emily. I found him. Her voice was quieter now. I asked, where? She hesitated. In the street. What street? I don't remember. When? I don't remember exactly. Did you report finding a lost dog? No. Did you take him to a veterinarian to scan for a microchip? No. Did you contact any shelter? No. Did you see the missing dog post before or after you took possession of him? She said nothing. The silence answered for her. Then she tried one last time. I bonded with him. Rachel let out a sound that was almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. I looked at Patricia and said, "No, Miss Caldwell, you used him." Her face tightened. You used him to enter businesses without accountability. You used him to frighten employees. You used him to threaten lawsuits. You used him to demand money, gift cards, apologies, and silence. And then you brought him into this courtroom as the centerpiece of a false claim. She looked away. I continued. You sued Emily Dawson for doing her job correctly. You accused her of discrimination when the evidence shows she followed the law. You called 911 not because there was an emergency, but because you wanted police power used against a young employee who challenged your story. You submitted a recording you believed would help you, but that recording revealed the truth of your own scheme. Patricia whispered, I was distressed. I said, you were exposed. The courtroom stayed completely still. That sentence was not emotional. It was factual. And sometimes facts, when spoken plainly, cut deeper than anger ever could. Then I addressed Emily. She looked startled when I said her name, as if she had spent the entire case expecting to be punished somehow. Miss Dawson, I said, you did nothing wrong. Her face changed instantly. It was not relief at first. It was disbelief. Then her eyes filled again. I told her she had asked the permitted questions. She had responded to disruptive animal behavior. She had not demanded medical details. She had not blocked lawful access. She had not harassed Patricia Caldwell. She had acted with more restraint than many adults. Twice her age would have shown under that pressure. Emily began to cry again, but this time the tears did not look like fear. They looked like release. Daniel Carter lowered his head. I could tell those words mattered to him, too. Managers often stand between corporate fear and employee dignity. He had hesitated to fire Emily, but the accusation had still damaged her. The public clip Patricia posted had made strangers believe a lie, and that is one of the ugliest parts of modern humiliation. A person can cut a video into pieces, post the one angle that makes them look righteous, and send the mob after someone who never had a camera in their hand. I ordered Patricia Caldwell's claim dismissed with prejudice. That meant she could not bring the same claim again. Then I ruled on the related civil matters before me. Patricia was responsible for Emily Dawson's documented lost wages connected to the suspension that resulted from the false accusation. She was responsible for costs incurred by the store in responding to the fraudulent claim. She was responsible for the return of the dog, already confirmed by microchip records, to Rachel Morgan. I also referred the matter to the appropriate authorities for investigation into potential theft, misuse of emergency services, false statements, and fraudulent claims. Patricia's head snapped up at that. Criminal investigation? She said there it was. The fear finally became real, not for Emily, not for Rachel, not for Ethan, for herself. I looked at her and said, "You called 911 to weaponize law enforcement against an innocent employee. You filed a civil claim based on representations that evidence has shown to be false. You possessed a dog registered to another family and presented that dog as your own trained service animal. Those issues do not end because your lawsuit failed." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. For once, Patricia Caldwell had no sentence ready. Rachel Morgan quietly wiped her face. Emily sat with both hands in her lap, breathing as if she had finally been allowed to put down a weight she had carried too long. But I was not finished because there was a larger truth in that courtroom, and I wanted it stated clearly. I said, the protections given to people with disabilities are not loopholes for dishonest people. They are not props. They are not threats to be thrown at workers, restaurants, grocery stores, hotels, airlines, or anyone else simply because someone wants special treatment without responsibility. Those protections exist because real people need them. Real people depend on them. And every time someone abuses them, they make life harder for the very people the law was designed to protect. Patricia stared down at the table. I do not know if she felt shame. I cannot honestly tell you that I have learned not to invent remorse where I do not see it, but I can tell you what I saw in everyone else. I saw Emily Dawson sit a little taller. I saw Daniel Carter place a quiet hand on the back of her chair, not dramatically, just enough to say, "I know now. I believe you." I saw Rachel Morgan look toward the courtroom doors, where her son waited with Oliver. And for the first time since she stood up from the gallery, her face carried something other than pain. It carried peace, not complete peace. A family does not recover 7 months of fear in one afternoon. A child does not stop blaming himself simply because the truth appears. But healing has to begin somewhere. That day, it began in my courtroom. Patricia Caldwell was escorted out after the hearing. She did not look back at Emily. She did not apologize to Rachel. She did not ask whether Ethan was okay. She simply gathered her folder, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the doors with the stiff pride of someone who still believed the world had treated her unfairly. Some people leave court changed. Some only leave defeated. Patricia was the second kind. After she was gone, Rachel asked if she could say something to Emily. I allowed it. She walked to the defense table slowly. Emily stood uncertain, still wiping her eyes. Rachel looked at her and said, "Thank you for asking the question." Emily shook her head. "I didn't know." "I know," Rachel said, "but if you hadn't asked, we might never have found him." That sentence broke Emily again. Daniel turned away for a moment, pretending to check his papers. I pretended not to notice. Judges do that sometimes. We pretend not to notice when people need a private second in a public room. A few minutes later, Ethan came back in briefly with Oliver in his arms. The fake vest was gone. Rachel had removed it in the hallway. Without that red costume, Oliver looked smaller, softer, like a dog again, not an argument. He rested his head against Ethan's shoulder, and Ethan looked at Emily. He said, "You helped bring him back." Emily smiled through tears. That was the real verdict of the day. Not the order, not the dismissal, not the referral. Those mattered. Of course. Law matters. Consequences matter. But the moment that stayed with me was a young employee who had been falsely branded cruel, being told by a child that she had helped return what was stolen. That is why this case still follows me, because it reminded me how easily manipulative people can reverse the roles of victim and villain. Patricia Caldwell walked into my courtroom claiming she had been humiliated, targeted, and harmed. She wanted everyone to see Emily as heartless, Daniel as discriminatory, Rachel as irrelevant, and herself as untouchable. But truth has a way of rearranging the room. By the end, Emily was not the attacker. She was the person brave enough to ask a lawful question. Rachel was not a stranger interrupting a case. She was a mother who had been searching for a missing piece of her son's life. Ethan was not just a child outside the courtroom. He was the human cost of Patricia's selfishness, and Patricia Caldwell was not a disabled woman being denied dignity. She was a manipulator who tried to hide behind the dignity of others. I have presided over many cases, but I still remember the sound Oliver made when he heard Ethan's voice. That small cry carried more truth than every document Patricia brought into court. It cut through the fake certificate, the rehearsed tears, the legal threats, the 911 call, the online performance, and every polished lie she had prepared. That sound told us where he belonged. And sometimes, in court, justice is not loud. Sometimes justice is a child kneeling on the floor, holding the dog he thought he lost forever. Sometimes justice is a young woman hearing after weeks of fear that she did the right thing. Sometimes justice is watching a lie collapse under the weight of one simple question. What task is the dog trained to perform? Patricia Caldwell thought that fake service dog would save her. But in the end, it was the dog who exposed her, and I will never forget the silence that followed.